Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Laura Owens.
And I'm Jan Black.
On this episode, we welcome back Andrew Tarvin, who calls himself the world's first humor engineer, teaching people how to get better results while having more fun. He's worked with more than 250 organizations from around the world, helping them to use humor to achieve happiness and success in the workplace.
Andrew is the author of several books on humor, including his latest, Humor That Works: The Missing Skill for Success and Happiness at Work. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us again.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me back.
You say you can take your career to the next level by using humor in the workplace today. So how do you go about doing that?
That is a great question, and I think it centers around an important thing that I don't think people realize is that humor is a skill, which means it can be learned. And as people kind of in the workplace, we can intentionally use that skill of humor to achieve specific results. So this isn't just like, hey, have more fun in what you do, which is certainly part of it, but how do you strategically use humor in specific situations or to achieve specific goals? And as an engineer, that's what I'm all focused on.
So the new book is called Humor That Works. So what is humor that does work versus humor that doesn't work?
Great question. So humor that works is a way of working that is different, effective, and fun. And that's a big distinction, I think, for some people to recognize, is that a lot of times people hear humor, and so they think funny, they think of comedy. And, we're saying this isn't about making the workplace funny so much as making it a little bit more fun. And along those lines, humor that doesn't work is humor that divides. So humor that you're using as a way to exclude certain people in the workplace, not very effective. Humor that disparages others. So maybe some people might use humor as a way to punch down or to make fun of a specific target. Or humor that distracts. So sometimes, I think sometimes you think of this as kind of the quintessential, ping pong tables in the workplace where people are like, no, that's a sign that we have a fun workplace culture, right? We've got a ping pong table. But if it's right next to a bunch of desks and people are going to go insane hearing ping pong balls going back and forth every single day, not exactly kind of a helpful, actual good form of humor. So what we're talking about, what does work is really kind of being intentional about the humor that we use to get those results and avoiding distraction, disparagement, or division.
So humor in the workplace used in the wrong way could take your career down a notch, correct? Instead of using it in the right way and taking it up a notch.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a distinction there. I think that, people are worried about using humor in the sense of, getting fired or it being awkward. And there's kind of two different distinctions between that. So the way that I kind of frame it is that there's a difference between bad humor and inappropriate humor, right? Like a bad joke, an example of a bad joke is I once had to miss class because of hypothermia. I was too cool for school. And it's a silly joke. It's a dumb pun.
Right.
So that's a bad joke. An inappropriate joke is one that has an inappropriate target, comes at an inappropriate time, or talks about an inappropriate topic. And an inappropriate joke you can lose your job over. A bad joke, typically, that you're not going to have serious ramifications from. In fact, they did a study and they found that people who use positive humor that was positive, they saw an increase in people seeing them as more confident and as more competent. If they used humor that didn't result in a successful laugh, so what they called "quote unquote" bad humor, so that it didn't, it just wasn't successful, there was still an increase in perceived confidence and no detriment to the level of competence that you had. However, if you used inappropriate humor, and even if it worked, people saw you as less competent. You were maybe seen as more confident to still actually use humor, but you were seen as less competent, less kind of understanding the emotional intelligence or being able to read the room to say, hey, that wasn't appropriate in the workplace. So again, there's distinction between bad and inappropriate. And even if it's kind of bad humor, no one laughs, typically it's not going to be detrimental to your career.
How should team leaders be different in if and how they use humor versus just a regular team member?
Yeah, that is a great question, because one of the things about humor is that your relationship to people matters very much, right? Like you I imagine the two of you have certain humor that you can use, having known each other for ever, right?
Right,
Exactly.
literally.
Yes, in one case, certainly, yeah.
In my case, the literal thing from the moment, right?
Uh-huh.
But that's very different humor than you would use with someone that you're meeting for the first time. And so understanding your relationship with people is important, as well as a leader, understanding your status, right? A joke that you make with someone that you think is, hey, we're just kind of playfully making fun of each other is okay if it's someone that is a peer or maybe a friend, but as soon as you're the manager of others and your status is higher than them, it can come across as you being mean or you being aggressive. And so understanding your status and your relationship with other people is very important.
And you say it's important for the boss to use humor. So, because that helps other people on the team feel that it's okay to use humor. What should the boss be doing? How should the boss be doing this?
Yeah, well, I think to kind of emphasize that point that you're bringing up is that, part of what I believe is that no matter who you are, what level you're at, that you are responsible for your own happiness. Right. It's up to you. You decide every single day of how you're going to do your work. And hopefully, it's not up to your manager. It's not to your coworkers to make sure that you enjoy what you do. But hopefully they don't deter that. But having said that, we do know that managers often dictate the culture of a team. And so, in fact, the number one reason why people don't use humor in the workplace is they say that they don't think that their boss or coworkers would approve. And so that means that if you're a manager of a team and people aren't really laughing, they're not really friendly with each other, you might be part of the reason why. And so we do want to encourage managers to be kind of outwardly focused with using humor to show their people that, hey, this is an okay thing to do. And a couple of things to kind of keep in mind when using humor is, one, to keep it, positive and inclusive. Back to that idea of the status, has an impact on how it's perceived. If you do something positive, inclusive, team building events, happy hour things that you're going to, more storytelling, applied improv exercises, things where everyone is involved, there is no target, those types of things tend to really help because everyone is included. So that's a great form of humor to use, as well as self-deprecating humor. So when you're in a high-status position, self-deprecating humor can be a great way to reduce your status because you poke fun of yourself a little bit and you're showing the audience or your people that, hey, I don't take myself too seriously. I recognize that, I put my pants on one leg at a time just like everyone else. And that humor allows people to then connect.
More
like,
relatable.
oh, exactly.
How often is it okay to use humor without becoming the office clown?
11.7% of the time. As an engineer, I wish I had an exact percentage for you. But I think, a couple of guidelines to keep in mind so that you find that balance is, because you don't want to be seen as the class clown. You don't want to be seen as kind of the corporate jokes or anything like that. And I think a way to manage that is to follow the humor map, right? So it's not about using humor so that people think you're funny. It's not about using humor as a form of validation, right? So this is what Michael Scott on The Office did a lot of times because people would point to Michael Scott and they'd be like, wait, but he used humor and everyone made fun of him. And that's because he was seeking validation. He wanted people to like him and think that he was really funny, as opposed to going by what we call a humor map, which is understanding your medium, which is, how are you executing that humor as in an email or as in a phone call? Who your audience is. This goes back to that idea of, what is your relationship to them? And then most importantly, what is your purpose? What is your reason for using humor? Because, you can use humor for the sake of fun, but you can also use it for a specific result. Like, oh, I want to use humor here to get people to actually open my email and read it. Or I want to use humor here in this meeting so that people actually pay attention to what I'm talking about. Or, oh, I want to use humor in my commute home so that I relieve some stress and show up more present for my family. Like having that specific goal in mind and using the appropriate humor to achieve that goal changes humor into this thing that's like, oh, that person's just trying to be funny, into, oh, wow, that person is really effective or really adept at understanding the situation and getting results.
Thank you so much for being part of our Nobody Told Me family. From time to time, we share information about our sponsors, and today we'd like to tell you about GenoPalette, which is offering a special discount exclusively for our listeners.
GenoPalette uses your personal DNA analysis to discover your ideal intake of carbs, protein, fats, vitamins, and minerals. I've struggled with various nutritional issues, so I was thrilled to get my own GenoPalette analysis. It told me I was likely to have a gluten sensitivity, in addition to metabolizing alcohol and caffeine slower than most people.
Your GenoPalette analysis includes a personalized food map, including the 85 foods that are the healthiest for you based on your DNA. This is great because it lets you know exactly what your body needs from a genetic level.
GenoPalette told me that avocados, soybean sprouts, and turnip greens are among the best genetic-based food recommendations for me, along with plain bagels, egg noodles, and lentils. My report is 19 pages long, so those are just a few of the highlights. To get your report, go to genopalette.com. If you have existing DNA data from 23andMe or Ancestry, like I did, you can easily upload your data and get your report in a few simple steps.
Otherwise, you can order the DNA kit like I did directly from GenoPalette. I can't wait for my results. When you use the code NobodyToldMe, you'll get 20% off your report. That's genopalette.com, spelled GenoPalate. Code NobodyToldMe. So check out genopalette.com. I love the story you tell in the book about the boss who starts meetings telling his kids knock-knock jokes. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. So I was working one-on-one with a CEO of a company, and he was asking me, he was saying that he wanted to try to find a way to better connect with his people in his company, particularly people that were 2 or 3 or 4 levels below him. He's like, I have a good relationship with my direct reports. It's the other people who I don't see all that often that I feel like I don't really connect with. And in that same meeting, he was asking me for some knock-knock jokes because he said that his kids love knock-knock jokes, and he knows, I love puns and wordplay and all that. So he's like, do you have any good knock-knock jokes? And so after thinking about it a little bit, I recommended to him, I was like, you should start each one of your town hall meetings with knock-knock jokes. And he was like, that's stupid. And I was like, okay, yeah, I understand it's a little bit different. But, trust me, I think this will work. Say a couple of knock-knock jokes and tell the audience that, your kids love knock-knock jokes. And so he does it, and then he comes back, and I asked him how it went, and he said that it was a little bit silly. It was a little bit weird. He said the first joke, there was kind of a weird, awkward silence. People were kind of confused as to what was going on. After the second joke, he said there was kind of some polite laughter. And then after the third joke, he's like, people actually really laughed. But the real value was afterwards, people who he had never really chatted with, including a new hire, came up to give him knock-knock jokes.
Oh, wow.
And so what was great in that situation is that is not the knock-knock jokes. There's nothing inherently great about knock-knock jokes that changes that, although I do love them. But it was rather that he was expressing to his people that he was a father first and a CEO second. And now he had this he opened the door. So, if you go up to talk to the CEO just to kind of say hello, you're nervous. You're like, what am I going to possibly talk about? He's going to ask me about what I do. She's going to be like wondering, pestering me with different questions of like what I've been liking about the company or what I don't like. Whereas starting with knock-knock jokes, now you can just go up simply with knock-knock jokes and be like, hey, if your kids love them, try this one out. And now you're starting to build that as a human relationship as opposed to a boss and worker relationship.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What should you do on a job interview? Like, how can you get a feel for how the team relates and whether or not you should use jokes or humor in that initial communication?
Yeah, it's a great question because, right, there's anytime you're meeting someone new, there's that kind of like feeling out thing of like, is this going to be okay? Or, does this group like puns, or will they be like, are they the people that kind of boo puns or that thing? And
are they going to hire you because you get along with them and you gel with their humor? Or, do they not want jokes? Does it need to be serious? Like, I just don't know how you can tell initially.
Yeah, well, one, I would say, and you kind of touch on an interesting point that I think people sometimes forget, is that an interview is not only are they interviewing you, you are interviewing them as a company. And if you have a natural sense of humor and you want to use humor, and a company doesn't hire you because you are quote unquote too funny in an interview or you were too playful, for me at least, I wouldn't want to work at that company. Right? Like
Yeah.
it's like a long time ago, I used to have sense of humor on my resume when I was actually like applying for things, and people were like, "Yeah, but what if a company doesn't hire you because you have sense of humor listed there, and they think it's too different or too silly or too whatever?" And I'm like, "Great, because I don't want to work for
Weed them out
Yeah.
early.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that's part of it, but still understanding it, I think there's a couple of things that you can do. One is understanding that humor is more broad than comedy. Like we said, it's not about being funny, but being a little bit more fun. So in an interview, you might answer a question with a story. And in that story, you can kind of give a little bit. You can drop a couple of kind of like funny lines and see how people react. As long as those lines are kind of positive and inclusive, even if no one laughs, they become a positive and inclusive statement. And so you can kind of gauge that reaction and be like, oh, okay, if they like that kind of joke, then maybe I can go a little bit more into it a little bit later. I think the other thing that you can do is in conversation and in small talk. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is asking interesting questions, right? We go to networking events all the time, and everyone asks the question of, what do you do? Right? And so you always get an answer to that. And so instead, you can ask a slightly more interesting question. So I like the question like, say, what's something cool that you've worked on in the last 3 months? And that a lot of times you'll understand or you'll learn what the other person does because they'll kind of explain it in their answer. But they get a lot more excited to answer a question like that than to just say, oh, I'm an accountant, or, oh, I run this company, or, oh, whatever, right? They now get into something that they can be a little bit more excited about, and it builds a stronger relationship because it's not the same kind of dress rehearsal response that you're used to.
You talk about the importance of using conversational humor in the workplace as opposed to maybe, just telling one joke after another. How do you develop conversational humor?
So it's definitely can feel challenging to some people, but I think the greatest way is improvisation, is to take an improv class or at least to learn more about improvisation and specifically the yes and mindset.
What's your favorite thing that you've learned from improv?
I would say that, well, it's interesting because improv shows you can learn fascinating things from in the actual improv show, and you learn, oh, that's, actually true. So, for example, I just recently saw an improv show with Rick Andrews and Louis Kornfeld based here in New York, and discovered that bees elect a queen bee based on the nectar and everything that they give to the bee. That is what then later makes that person the queen bee a little bit later. I'm sure that's not at all what you were asking in the question. I'm like, what but there is a lot of truth in comedy. The actual thing from the process of improvisation that I've learned is that mentality of yes and so the idea of yes and, some people hear the phrase and they think that means becoming a yes person, like saying yes to everything and always thinking that everything is perfect and never, pointing out the flaws or the risks in situation. And that's not the case. Yes and simply means focusing on what you like about a situation and building from there, focusing on, say, a positive direction as opposed to a negative. And it's not to say that yes, but, or a critical mindset is a bad mindset. It's just to say that yes and exists as well, and that there are certain times, like when we want to build more effective relationships, when we want to leave a positive, lasting impression, when we want to brainstorm ideas, that yes and is a little bit more valuable or gets us a little bit better results.
You talk about how playing your work is an easy way to start having more fun. What do you mean by that, by playing your work?
Yeah, well, it's based a little bit on a very dumb question. And so I'll ask the two of you this dumb question, but I still want an actual answer.
Okay.
But the dumb question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun?
Fun.
I would go with fun.
I'm gonna say fun. Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Exactly, right? So it's a dumb question, but it stands to reason that if you're more willing to do something that's fun, that means that if you were to make your work a little bit more fun, you'd probably be a little bit more engaged in, or will be a little bit more willing to do it longer. And so what we mean by play your work is to simply find ways to add a little bit more fun to what you do, to gamify the process perhaps, or, to find ways to, so for example, when I'm going through data entry or looking at invoices and things, and I start listening to music, like right now I'm listening to Hamilton like all the time, right? Because it's songs that I really like, and so it makes the process a little bit more fun. Or you can, if there's a certain task that you have to do, can you kind of pair up with someone and do that activity, or can you do something else physical, say, along with it? So if you have meetings, one-on-one meetings that you have to do, can you do a walk and talk, or a meet and eat, or a run and, I don't know, there's got to be some type of rhyme with run. A run and get it done or something. Right?
Yeah.
You're just finding ways to make the process just a little bit more enjoyable so that no matter what it is you're doing, you like it. And this is, I think, an important distinction because I think a lot of times people say, oh, you got to do what you love, right? If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life, which I don't, completely believe, because I'm doing something that I absolutely love, but there are certainly days where I'm like, I don't love this data entry that I'm doing right now, or I could, I don't always have to send these types of invoices, things out. So I think rather than thinking about, oh, I got to find what it is that I love and do it, I think instead of doing what you love, find ways to love what you do. Find ways to change your perspective a little bit so that you make the process of the work that you have to do a little bit more enjoyable.
Everyone has been in the same situation before where they have said a joke and it's fallen flat and you're completely embarrassed. What are some good ways to get out of that?
Recovery, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, I would say a couple of things to that. One is a lot of times the situation is only awkward if you make it awkward.
Yeah.
Right? If you're expecting this laugh and you kind of say this line and then you're just kind of like, anyone? Right? You're nudging your elbow or whatever. That's what makes it awkward, is that awkward pause.
Yeah.
If the joke is positive and inclusive, right? And sometimes people kind of get caught up a little bit on this idea of positive inclusive because they're like, oh, but when I watch the stand-up comedians on stage, they're the ones using satire and sarcasm, and they're using aggressive jokes, and they're talking about, sex and drugs and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, that's a comedy stage. Our goal, again, in the workplace is not to be seen as so funny that people are like, you should do comedy. It should be more that you're getting better results. And so, yeah, the rules are a little bit different. So we want to keep that positive inclusive. We want to kind of be willing to move past, if you say a joke and you just keep kind of talking and moving along with it, then most of the time people won't even really notice it. I will say, that being said, there are a couple of things that you can do. So, for example, one of my favorite comedians is Eddie Izzard. British comedian, has some great bits out there, very, very funny storyteller. And if he says a joke that doesn't land, he'll take out like an imaginary notebook and then write a note to himself that he vocalizes, and he'll just say things like, oh, never tell that joke again, or that was funnier than I did before. Right? So you can have these, what we call in comedy, saves. So you can have these kind of saves lined up so that if you say something that doesn't work, you have this thing that you can go to.
And I know you advise people that if someone makes a joke or attempts to make a joke, go ahead and laugh. What does that do?
Yeah, well, so like going back to this idea that the number one reason why people don't use humor in the workplace is because they don't think that their boss or their coworkers would approve. Part of one of the easiest ways to encourage more humor at work is to simply laugh or smile a little bit more. And, this kind of comes from the idea that as far as I know, there's no limit to laughter, right? We're not given a set number of laughs that we have in life. And I don't think it's going to be that if you laugh at maybe a so-so joke at work, I don't think that you're ever going to go home afterwards, start watching a Netflix comedy special, and then be physically unable to laugh, right? Oh no, I used up on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No more left for today.
Exactly. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so you can be a little bit more positive, and maybe you don't want to fake laugh. Okay, fine. So then give a smile on your face, or at least pull people aside and show appreciation and say, hey, I really appreciated how you told a story in that presentation as a way to set things up so that we were kind of engaged. Or I like that you use images instead of, death by PowerPoint for this thing. Or, hey, I really appreciate the jokes that you use, because a lot of times people appreciate those things, but they don't always articulate it. For example, at Procter & Gamble. So I used to work at Procter & Gamble before I started my company on humor. And I used to include jokes at the ends of each one of my status reports. And I remember coming to work one day and seeing a bunch of replies to an email. And I was a little bit worried. I was like, uh-oh, what did I do wrong? And I realized someone had commented they had all been replies that I forgot to include jokes to the email. And so people were replying back. They're like, hey, where were the jokes for this email? Hey, I was expecting a joke at the end of this email. Hey, I opened the email because I want to read the jokes. Where are they? And one, it was great because it gave me feedback that the jokes were working, that it helped to get people to actually read the email or at least open it.
Uh-huh.
But two, I had no idea that many people enjoyed the jokes, because some people would kind of reference, hey, I appreciated these, but I didn't know to what extent until it was missing. Did people even comment on it? So just be a little bit more, outwardly open about sharing what people are doing, or what you like about what they're doing, because that's how you get that behavior to happen a little bit more, is people do things that they get recognized for. And it could be, certainly recognition at a big level. We've worked with some companies to create some custom humor awards, or to add humor awards as part of their ongoing recognition. So in addition to, maybe you have a coach of the year award, you might have like a funniest email award for, the quarter or something like that as well. You can do something to that extent, or just laugh a little bit more, kind of give your verbal appreciation to some of the things that people are doing.
What are the latest and greatest ideas for humor in the workplace since you were last on our show?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes from when I was last on is really centering my work around the 5 skills of work. And so it's my belief that no matter who you are or what you do, you basically do 5 things. Right? You have to be able to execute. You have to be able to, send an email or fry the French fries if you work at a fast food place. You have to be able to shave an alpaca, right, if that's your job. You have to be able to think critically and creatively to solve problems strategically and to plan for the future. You have to be able to communicate, right, articulate the intelligence that you have and get, listen and actually get people to understand what you're saying. You have to be able to connect, right, because we still work with humans. So you have to understand emotional intelligence and empathy. And then finally, you have to be able to lead, right? You have to be able to influence people to some type of goal. No matter who you are, what you do, your work is some percentage of those 5. And it's going to be different depending on the role. Like more senior leaders are going to do more on the top of that pyramid of lead and connect, and more people, new hires might be more in the execution phase. But you do some percentage of that. And so there's a lot more on how do we get deliberate about how does humor help you with each one of those skills. So, for example, talking about playing your work, that is one way that we can execute faster. By gamifying our work, we get more interested in it. Or we can say use humor as a way to be more relatable or more relevant in our communication. So, for example, we can, a humor strategy of engineer surprise, using incongruity, just doing something a little bit differently, maybe changing our language. So, for example, kind of as you mentioned up top, I'm a humor engineer. And so that's something different that gets people to wait, humor engineer, isn't that an oxymoron? What does it mean? Right? It gets people listening a little bit more. And so we can engineer surprise through this incongruity, and that's a way that we can be relevant, because what's interesting, at least in my experience, humor is instant relevance, right? When you get people to laugh, when you get them to see that listening to you is going to be fun, now they're paying attention. And once you get them to laugh, you can get them to listen. Once you get them to listen, you can get them to learn or to take action or to do these other things.
In your new book, Humor That Works, you write about the 1 smile per hour strategy. What is that?
Yeah, so that is kind of the ultimate strategy that, if you're like, hey, I don't want to read an entire book on this thing, or hey, I don't want to, listen to a class or a workshop on this or whatever, this is the one strategy that we encourage everyone to walk away with, and that is to simply think 1 smile per hour. To simply think, okay, each hour of the day, what is one thing that you can do that brings a smile to your face or the face of someone else? Because what that does is it starts to develop this humor habit. It starts to help you see all the different ways that you could incorporate humor. So if you're going into a meeting, you could be like, okay, I have this meeting coming up. What's one thing that I can do in this meeting? Oh, well, maybe I'll take more visual notes this time, because that'll keep me a little bit more engaged. And doodling has actually been shown to help you to increase what it is that you retain. or, oh, I have this hour-long commute coming up. So, you know what, I'm going to put on this podcast so that I can listen to Jan and Laura talk about some really interesting topics and help me focus a little bit after a stressful day at work. Or maybe I'm getting ready to work for the next hour on email. So, and I think I shared this in the last time that we had it. So in this, while I'm going through emails, I'm going to read each of the emails in a different accent in my head. You know, whatever it is, just think about, okay, what is one way that I can bring a smile to my face or the face of someone else? You do that continually, and you'll start to see a lot of opportunities to incorporate more humor in what you do, and you'll have a lot more fun while doing it.
And we've asked you this before, but we're going to ask you this again. What is your nobody told me lesson? So what is a new thing that nobody told you about humor that you think everyone should know?
Yeah, well, I mean, nobody told me the bee thing. That was new. Specifically around humor, nobody told me initially how intentional you could be with humor, right? I think a lot of times we think of humor as just this natural skill that some people have and that they don't, and that it's a nice to have in the workplace. And it wasn't until I discovered things kind of on my own that, no, you can be intentional about it. You can be deliberate and say, I want to intentionally incorporate more humor into my work so that I get better results and I have more fun.
And Andrew, how can people connect with you on social media and the internet?
Sure. If they are interested in learning more about humor in the workplace, they can go to humorthatworks.com, where you'll find plenty of free articles, a free newsletter to sign up with, a link to the book, our online course, information about our workshops, all that kind of stuff there on humorthatworks.com. If they want to connect with me personally, if they were like, you know what, that hypothermia joke was the funniest thing that I've ever heard, and they want more of those.
They need more of it.
Exactly. If they need more of it, they can follow me on social media at Drew Tarvin, DREWTAR, V as in Victor, IN, on all the social media platforms. It's the same name, and that's where you'll find a bunch of jokes that I like to share.
Well, Andrew, it has been an absolute delight to talk with you again, and we thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Our thanks again to Andrew Tarvin, author of Humor That Works, The Missing Skill for Success and Happiness at Work. And you can learn more about him at humorthatworks.com and andrewtarvin.com. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You're listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.